Scripture for this evening comes from the book of Job, chapter 23. Job, chapter 23. We'll look at verses 1 through 4 as well as verse number 10. Job, chapter 23, verses 1 through 4, and also verse number 10. We are in a series answering the question why. As has been stated, people tend to get ridiculed when they want to know why. Why is usually followed up with why not or because. Well, those answers are not sufficient to satisfy the human longing for clarity, perspective, and understanding, which are necessary to help us to know how to proceed in life. So we want to look at this question why from a biblical perspective so that we can operate with human wisdom that is checked by divine wisdom. In other words, we don't want to just look at this from the perspective of how we understand, but we want our human wisdom to be infused by God's divine wisdom so that we can respond most appropriately. In our three previous discussions on the question why, we said number one, it could be that God may be punishing us. He wants to bring awareness, He wants to make us accountable, and He wants to change our actions when He is punishing us. Or it could be God is preparing us for something. He wants us to be prepared to work in His kingdom, to walk in a way that is consistent with what we profess, to be a worthy example to others, and sometimes God has to prepare us for the worst. Also, in our third last session, we talked about God's protection. Sometimes God allows things to happen because He's protecting us from sin, He's protecting us from Satan, He might be protecting us from someone, or He might even be protecting us from ourselves. Tonight, I want you to look at Job chapter 23, because Job was certainly a person who wanted to know why. And what we're going to look at tonight is an interesting answer to why. It could be for our perfection. You know, in the Bible, the word perfection means maturity. So it may not be punishment or preparation or protection. In this instance, it could be for our perfection or our maturity. Before we look at Job chapter 23, let me ask you, have you ever had some times that you just wish you and God could sit down in a diner at a coffee table and just have some discussions and get some understanding? You ever just wish God could sit on your couch and cross His leg and just give you some insights about things that are troubling your mind? That's exactly what we see with Job. In Job 23, starting at verse number 1, then Job answered and said, even today is my complaint bitter. My stroke is heavier than my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. In verse 10, but he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. Notice in the first few verses, Job is frustrated. He's aggravated. And Job just wants to meet the Lord in a diner and have a cup of coffee and say, Lord, I just need to pour out to you what's going on with me. I just need some understanding. Lord, can you come to my house, sit on my couch and cross your legs and just talk to me, Lord, because I'm overwhelmed with grief and affliction. I'm in great distress. If you read Job chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, you discover that Job experienced tremendous distress in his life, sickness, death of his family members, financial problems. He had what we would say in our vernacular, the weight of the world on him. When he gets to chapter 3, he says, "Cursed be the day that I was born." And so he desires here in Job 23 to just sit down with God, to have a talk. He says, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him." Job is overwhelmed. He wants to know, why me? Why now? And why so much? Have you ever found yourself in that predicament of distress, discouragement, despair? Why me? Why now? And why so much? But Job answers his own question in verse 10. He says, "But he knows the way I take. When he have tried me, I shall come forth as gold." You see, therein lies the answer. He talks about gold, and he talks about the idea of trying him. You see, in order for gold to have its value and its beauty to come forth, gold has to go through a trying or a refining process. In order for it to shine and for its value to be evident, it has to go into the fire. And in the fire, there the impurities are burned off. See, gold in its impure state is filled with sulfide and carbon and things of that nature. And so the refiner has to go through a process of burning off those impurities. Three things are necessary in order to make that happen. Number one, it has to be subjected to heat. Number two, it has to be subjected to heat over time. And number three, it has to be under the careful eye of the refiner. Gold gets its value and its beauty when it's been subjected to heat over time, under the watchful eye of a refiner. See, we have to understand what Job came to understand in verse 10 of Job chapter 23. Sometimes God has to allow us to go into the fire. Sometimes we have to deal with things over a period of time, and we have to trust that God has his watchful eye over us. That's the only way we get to our value. That's the only way our beauty comes forth. That's the only way we can shine sometimes. So we are accustomed to those comfortable ways in which God blesses us and matures us. Bible class, a sermon, praying for wisdom and getting wisdom, fellowship with saints. But understand that God also works with ways that are uncomfortable to us. It may not be Bible class. It may be the classroom of life. It may not be the sermon. It may be the circumstance. It may not be the answered prayer for wisdom. Sometimes God doesn't get our attention until we've been wounded. Sometimes it's not the fellowship that helps us. It's the enemy that helps us. Because God, again, has to try us. He has to allow us to go into the heat over time under his careful and watchful eye. Warren Wiersbe said, "When God puts his own people into the furnace, he keeps his eye on the clock and his hand on the thermostat. He knows how long and he knows how much." So the next time you ask the question, why, if you conclude God is not punishing me, God is not preparing me, he's not protecting me, it may be that God is perfecting me, that is, maturing me. A little heat over time under his careful eye, so that my value comes forward and I can shine like pure gold. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.